we get the most out of our kids' phonics books? Hi, I'm Jen, and if you haven't met me before, my job is to help you help your child learn to read. And today we're going to be talking about phonics books. Now, whether your child is in school or is homeschooled, usually one of the earliest things that parents either are given or get introduced to are phonics books. These are little books that can be decoded by our kids and therefore they can read them relatively independently. But when you first get given these books, it can be hard to know what to do with them. We want to ensure that our kids are getting the most out of these phonics books, but we don't really want to be going over the same ones again and again and again because, quite frankly, particularly with the early phonics books, they're just boring. There isn't very much in them. There's very few words. They tend to repeat themselves over and over again. So what we want to do is make sure that that first time of reading it is amazing. We want to engage our kids as much as we possibly can. We want to make it fun and we want to get the most out of it so that our kids are enjoying reading and feeling like they want to pick up another book and they want to try it again. So during today's little video, I'm going to take you through all the different things that we can do with a phonics book to support your children with them and make sure that you are getting the absolute most out of reading with your children. The first thing we're going to talk about are front covers of the book, because we can actually get an awful lot out of our kids before we've ever even opened the book or read one word. And the front covers are really, really useful. The first thing we want to do is talk about what they can see. So if we're using this one, we can see a snowman. What characters can we see? Well, we can see Kipper from the Biff, Chip and Kipper books. Your child might not know that. They might just say, I can see a boy in a hat and a coat. Brilliant. You're getting that vocabulary working, you're getting them to think about the book, you're getting them to identify what they can see. In this one, you can see we've got Gran, we've got Floppy, and we've got what seems to be a set of bars. It looks like Gran might be stuck behind something. So we want to talk about all of that with our kids and get them to explain what they can see. From that point, we then want to expand that and encourage them to think about what might happen in the story. So from this one, we can say, okay, so we've got a snowman and we've got a little boy. What do we think is going to happen? And your child might say, I think he's going to build a snowman. Or they might say, oh, I think it's going to be about finding clothes for the snowman. Or maybe the snowman comes to life and talks to the boy. Any of these hypotheses are great as long as they can be backed up by your child. So if you say, why do you think the snowman's going to come to life? They might say, because I saw a film where the hat made them come to life. Fantastic. They've used something that they've seen, they've used something that they've remembered to explain it. If they said something like, oh, I think he's going to go up in a spaceship and vanish, we might want to encourage them to either explain themselves. Maybe they've seen a spaceship that you haven't spotted. Great. Or we might want to say, oh, that's a really interesting idea. I can't see why that would happen from the pictures. Can you tell me what you think the pictures are going to tell us about this story? So you can then encourage your little one to give their own hypothesis, their own idea. Now, if you have a little one who finds that harder, don't worry. Let's say we've got this one and your little one is going, I don't know what's going to happen. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen next? What do you think the story is going to be about? I don't know. Who do you think the characters are going to be? A dog. Brilliant. Amazing. So you point at them. That's it. That's as far as we've got. No problem. Because what you can do as the adult, as the carer, as the parent, is say, I think so and so and so and so. And you can start off when your child is first getting to grips with this idea. You can start off by saying things like, I think someone's going to get trapped in a cage and then other people are going to have to go and rescue them. And I think that because I can see some bars and I can see she looks really shocked and we've got a worried looking dog here. So I think that's what's going to happen. Do you agree with me? And your little one might say yes, in which case you go, fantastic, should we read and find out whether we're right or not? Or they might say no, and you go, oh, why do you think that's not right? And they might say, I think the dog's trapped and we need to get, this lady's coming to help that dog. Perfectly valid reason. As your child gets more confident with this, you could become really dramatic with your ideas as well. You could say, okay, I can see there are bars, so I think that this granny has robbed a jewelry store and she's in prison. So you're still using things that you can see, your hypotheses, to explain that to your child, but you've gone that step further and made it really dramatic, made it really silly, so that your child is then able to either go, yes, I think that's right, or no, don't be silly. I think it's a much simpler story about this, that, or the other. By encouraging them to correct you, you're taking that next step and encouraging them to think about what's going to happen for themselves as well. So that's all the stuff about hypotheses. While none of that is reading, that is still really valuable because it's all comprehension based. It's building our children's understanding. So still a really good thing to start with, and it builds engagement as well because it means that our kids are more likely to want to read the story to find out if they were right or not. So next up, we're going to talk about the pictures inside the book. Now, this is often the most fun part for our kids, the part that they are most engaged with. So we want to give them some time to focus on the pictures. What we tend to see, or what tends to happen, even in my classroom with my one-to-one kids, is because time is short, we kind of push our kids through the reading and onto the next page. Read, next page, which is great. We want to encourage that reading. But a lot of kids want to look at the pictures, they want to see what they actually understand rather than put all that work into reading the words at the bottom. So we want to encourage our kids to do that because it will make them more likely to want to read. So we want to give them some set time. If we don't do that, what can end up happening is kids don't want to sit down and read at all because the only fun part for them is looking at the pictures and they don't get to do that. Now, obviously, as our kids become more confident readers, the pictures will be less important and the words will become fun on their own. But at the beginning, learning to read is really hard. So we want to give them as much praise and as much incentive to do that reading as possible. So I highly, highly recommend for each page, giving your child some time to look at the pictures. Now, you know your child best. I always say that. You know your child better than anyone else. So you will know whether it's better for your child to look at the picture first or to read the words first and look at the picture afterwards. Either way, if you find that your child is finding it a bit tricky to focus or to come away from looking at the pictures, you can always use a timer. I use this in my classroom regularly to say, okay, you have, and this is my 3-minute one, I don't know where my 1-minute one's gone, but you have 1 minute, just look at the pictures, just think about what's going on in the picture, what can you see, and then we're going to read. And when that 1-minute timer is up, they can visually see it because it's a sound timer, it's running through. Then we can read the words and then we can talk about the pictures as well. But when we are looking at the pictures, we can still get a lot out of them that will improve our child's reading. I know, weird. But by encouraging our kids to look at the pictures, talk about what they can see, identify things that are going on, we are encouraging their understanding and their comprehension, just like with the front cover when we were talking about that. So for example, you can say, okay, what can you see? Start off, get them to describe. I can see some kids are putting the gloves on the snowman. I can see there's a hat here, so maybe that's going to go on next. I can see there's someone on a bike coming down the path. Maybe they're going to go past. I can see a little robin flying off in the corner. All of this is building their vocabulary, building their understanding of narrative, and is really, really useful for reading. On top of that, you can go a step further and you can say, can you find me something that's green? So now you're giving them an instruction, you're getting them to engage their brains and think about what in this page is green. Okay, well, that's green. Fantastic. Next level up might be, can you find me something that is red and round? Now, there's lots of things that are red in this picture, but there's only one thing that's red and round, and that's the snowman's nose. I promise it is round. This is an old book. It's got slightly squished. So your child would then point at that and say, that's the one thing. So they've had to put 2 instructions in their brain and come out with an answer. All of this, again, is helping with comprehension. It's helping them to understand what's going on. It's helping them to build that awareness of vocabulary and instructions and questions and answers and all of that. So that's all really useful, and we've not even read a word yet. The only thing we want to avoid is getting our kids to guess at words by using pictures. The reason we don't want our kids to do this is because it's not encouraging them to be independent, it's encouraging them to guess. So here it says, it had green gloves. Now, we've got it had green. Your child might be able to sound those out. Gloves is a much, much harder word, so you might need to read that for them. But if you're saying, okay, it says g, and can we guess at what it says? Look at the picture, look at the picture. While in this situation that works, as your child's books get more and more difficult, it will become harder for them to work out the words just from the picture alone. And what we don't want is our kids losing confidence because they can't work out a word. What we do tend to see, particularly in year 1, which is where I tend to teach, is kids get to a point where they want to be better readers than they currently are. And so they rush through their reading and guess at words, which completely understandable. They are really engaged with reading. They want to be amazing. They want to keep going. I love that for them. But it actually means that they are not achieving as much as they want to achieve, which then puts them back a little bit. So we want to encourage them to sound out the words, even if they're not sure. I would say, okay, sound it out. G-l-o-v-s. Gloves. And you go, that was amazing sounding out. I'm so proud of you for sounding out all of those words and giving it a go at blending it. It's a weird word. This word is gloves. My turn, your turn. Gloves, gloves. Let's read the whole sentence together. It had green gloves. Amazing, what fantastic reading you're doing today. So again, by doing all of that praise, all of that verbalization, you're releasing endorphins into their brain and making them think, okay, that was a tricky word, that didn't make sense, but I was still really good because I was able to sound it out. And my parent then helped me to say what it actually was, and I read that whole page. Oh my gosh, I'm a brilliant reader and I'm going to keep trying rather than guessing at what they're seeing. So now we're actually onto the words and the reading part of this. I know, who would have thought that so much of this actually comes down to not reading at all, just engaging with the book and talking to your kids about it, because comprehension is just as important as phonics when it comes to understanding what we've read. But now let's look at the actual book. And I do want to clarify, we don't actually expect our kids to read everything in the book. Now, when we start off with books like this, there are quite a few words that you might notice your child can't work out on their own. Nose, for example, isn't a reception word. It's one they would more likely learn about January, February, maybe March of year one. So it's not a word they're going to be able to work out on their own. We don't expect our kids to read that. These books are designed to be read with adults or alongside adults. So what we want to do is encourage our children to read parts of it and bits that they can recognise, and then support them to read the rest. And that's the same whether it's this or this. With these level books, sometimes kids look at that and they get a little bit overwhelmed because that's a big step up in the amount of reading they're expected to do. So there is nothing wrong with supporting your child's reading, even at this level. If you can say to them, I'm going to read a page and you're going to read a page, that's great. They're listening to you read, particularly if you've got your finger underneath the words as you're reading. They're taking on board what you're saying, and they are still understanding and developing that awareness of the narrative and the story and understanding what's going on without the added pressure of having to read it themselves. And then they are going to have a go at reading it themselves as well. We often find that when kids are faced with something like this, and it feels like quite a lot, when they are given a chance to read in pairs or read in a partnership, they actually end up reading more because they've got a bit of a break, and then they can carry on. And it feels like they are in a team, they're working together. So I just wanted to add that in. We don't expect our kids to read absolutely everything of the book. If they want to, fantastic. There's nothing wrong with picking and choosing bits and pieces as works for you. So now moving on to the actual reading. So let's take this page. We have "It had a red nose." Now for our little ones, they can read all of this except for nose, but we're only going to choose one word just for now. Let's choose the word red. The way we want to encourage our kids to do this is put the sounds on your fingers. So we want to sound out first, e, d. Brilliant. Now put it on your fingers, e, d. Fantastic. Now we want to blend it together. My favorite way is the slinky method. So you take it and you push it together. So red, red. What's the word? Red. Fantastic. That now we have the word. We want to make sure that we can fit it into the sentence. So we always want to reread the whole sentence at the end. So I would then say, and that word is nose. It's a tricky word. Well done for reading all of that. Let's read it all together. It had a red nose. And you want to encourage your child to do that themselves as well, so that you know that they are confident in remembering all the words that they've said, so they can get that narrative themselves as well. Now, that method is the perfect method for all of it. It can carry on up until here. Even when you get to long words like banged, we still sound that out. B-a-nged, b-a-nged, banged. The word is banged. And you can keep building that up no matter what level your child's reading is, but that is very basically how I would encourage your child to sound out the words and blend them together. Now, I've got another video on the biggest mistake that parents make, which is schwaring, and that's where you add an onto the end. I've explained it in a much better video in my Instagram, but ultimately we want to make sure that the sounds are as pure as possible. So let's take the word sat. We want to say s, not s. So ultimately, you just don't want your mouth to move when you're saying it. For almost every sound, this is the case. So it would become s-a-t rather than s-a-t, which then becomes s-a-ta when you're trying to blend it together. So again, I've got tips on how to help with that in the PDF that you can link to, that is linked to this. So make sure you just click on that link and it'll take you straight through, or pop me a message and I'll make sure that I forward it over to you as and where I can. So now we're going to talk about that final part that ties all of this together, which is tricky words and high frequency words. Now, these are two separate things and they're a little bit weird, so I'm going to go over them both. First off, we have tricky words. Tricky words are words that cannot be sounded out on their own. We also already mentioned the. These are built up over time as your child learns to read. So for example, the first set of tricky words for all phonics schemes except Read Write Inc are I, know, go, to, into, and the. So we want to encourage our children to read these and recognize these. When we come across these in the book, and for some books they won't have any of them, for some books they'll have loads. When we come across these, we want to encourage our children to read them, recognize them, and remember them as we can. So here we have the. Again, we just encourage our children. We say, that's a tricky word. It says the. We can't sound it out. It's not it's the. And we say, okay, can you remember that? Glue it in your head. I've had a few different activities to do with this. Some are put your hand up every time you see that word, make a note every time you see that word, flap your wings like a bird every time you see that word, however you want to do it. But I would encourage you to go through and see how many times you can find the word the. And that can include any piece of writing. So we've got the, there, and so on and so forth. That is a tricky word. All we can do is learn it by sight. High frequency words are slightly different because they include all the tricky words and a few set words that can be sounded out on their own, like, flicking straight back into this, it. It is not a tricky word. We can sound it out. We can go it, but we want to encourage our children to read these by sight. Now, these are far less important. So if you are at the point where you're like, Jen, my brain is overflowing, leave it. But if you want to just have a quick understanding of it, these are ones that will come up regularly, so we want to encourage our kids to remember them as they see them. I would recommend taking maybe one word per book that you want to build on. And if you've got the PDF, I've given you a list of all 100 high frequency words for year one. But these words come up so often that the quicker our kids can recognize them, the less pressure is on them to read yet another word. That's the whole idea. We can just take a little bit of a step back, help our kids to remember something straight off so reading becomes that little bit easier for them. So that is everything to do with how we can utilise our phonics book. I know it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. If you have any questions or queries, you can always reach me at jen@theprimaryeducator.co.uk, or you can pop me a message on any of my platforms. I'm jen.teachers.reading on Instagram. I've sent in the PDF, there's loads and loads of links for you to click on, but you can always reach out, message me. I will be sending you lots of extra tips and tricks. That's what I do. So if you would like to be involved, just stick around. That's all. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me for today. If you have any questions, pop them down below or send them over. And hopefully I'll see you very soon to help you with something else.